everybody, welcome back to another video. So we finally finished reading the Subterraneans by Jack Kerouac, and I wanted to talk about it. So first of all, I am a very big Jack Kerouac fan. This is the 7th Jack Kerouac book that I've read, but this one just did not do it for me. I did not enjoy this book at all. I don't want to call it unreadable because obviously I was able to finish it, but this book is pretty much unreadable. Not only is it the worst Jack Kerouac book I've ever read, I think it's one of the worst books I've read in general. It's just this long stream of consciousness, kind of rambling sentences that go on for sometimes, in some cases, several paragraphs, several pages. It's just all over the place. I mean, the topic of what he's talking about changes from sentence to sentence. Sometimes within the same sentence, what he's talking about will shift. You never know if he's talking about, something that's happening now or a memory or something that he's, envisioning in his head. It's just kind of all over the place. This kind of stream of consciousness works in some of his other books very well, like Tristessa. It works very well in there. In other books, he has sections where he goes into these kind of stream of consciousness, rambling kind of writing. But in this one, it's just, the whole book is just that, and it just doesn't really work at all. It just comes off as very poorly written. I mean, in other books, it works well when you have kind of this intentionally, poor written writing, but in this, it just comes off as just very poor writing that he just put little work into editing it afterwards. But obviously, I did take away some things from this. I'm glad I read it just to understand this book. This book comes up quite a bit, and when people talk about Jack Kerouac, I think it's sometimes considered one of the most important books to read, and reading about Jack Kerouac. But it just wasn't doing it for me. I don't know if something I'm missing with this. If anyone has any comments about this, you don't agree with me, I'm more than happy to discuss. I'd like to know what people like about this book, because I just did not enjoy it at all. But this book was published in 1958, so it was a year after On the Road was published in 1957. When he wrote On the Road, when he originally wrote it in 1951, there was those years of trying to get it published. But within that time frame from 1951 to 1957, he was really experimenting. He wrote multiple novels during that time period. And I think he was experimenting a lot with different types of writing. And this Subterraneans was just one of the examples of his experimentation in writing, and ended up getting published. It was the first book published after On the Road, so significant in that sense. But this book, the events of this book take place, I believe, a year or so after the events that happened in On the Road. But the real life events of this book is based off of happened in New York City. But in this book, the setting of the book is shifted to San Francisco. Sure, he shifts other things as well. There must be other things that he changed when writing that. But yeah, it's based off an actual time period in Jack Kerouac's life. But in the midst of all this rambling and incoherent writing, you do kind of get a feel of the beatnik culture during that time period. And they kind of bounce around between bars, parties, jazz clubs, kind of hanging out in people's houses. You get kind of a sense of the free spirit that young people in this culture were experimenting with during the early to mid 1950s. But the main focus of this book is his relationship with this woman named Mardu Fox, who's based off an actual person. I forget the name of the person who it's actually based off of. It's someone in the beatnik community, but her name is Mardu Fox in this book. And she was an African-American woman, so obviously in the 1950s, a white man being with a African-American woman is not very common. I think that really represents kind of how the beatniks represented this change that was beginning to happen in America during the 1950s, and which really exploded in the 1960s. I think as much as this book highlights a lot of the free spirit of the beatnik culture in the early 1950s, it also highlights some of the negative aspects of that. On top of this free spirit, there's also a lot of underlying mental health issues that these people had in their lives. They kind of traveled around a lot. They really didn't live a normal lifestyle, so they had a lot of underlying issues. And the woman Mardu Fox in this book definitely has a lot of mental health issues. When he gets in this relationship with her, a lot of his friends are warning her that she's psychotic and she's known to do very things that don't make sense. So that comes up quite a bit in this book. And throughout the relationship, Kerouac is very unsure of his relationship, unsure of himself, afraid to commit, constantly second guessing things, and you can tell that Kerouac has a lot of issues in his personal life. And by the end of the book, they end up breaking up, and Mardu ends up being with someone else, another character in the story. And there's just a big sense of regret and despair at the very end of this book, where he regrets losing her and kind of is unsure where his future is going to go after this. And I think in the middle of the book, it really focuses on a lot of the issues, mental health issues that Mardu has. But by the end of the book, she's in a relationship with someone else. She kind of has herself figured out, but you kind of see that Kerouac is the one who has issues by the end. This book really goes into, I wouldn't say goes into detail, but it really shows that he has a problem with alcohol. He's an alcoholic. He has a fear of intimacy. There's a lot of underlying things going on in his life throughout the events of this book. And I think this kind of stream of consciousness, just kind of all over the place writing, really shows that Kerouac is very in his head. You're just taking raw thoughts that he has and just putting them on the paper, and it just kind of shows how in his head he was. And the events dictated in this book show a time period where Jack Kerouac was living in one central place. So it was a time of relative stability in this era where he was always moving, traveling, constantly on the move. So I think it kind of highlights how when he was still, when he was in one place, he never felt comfortable. He always had this need to move and go somewhere else, and his relationship with this woman really represents that, where he wants to be with her, but at the same time he doesn't want to be with her. He's just not used to stability, and he just wants to constantly be changing, going to something else. And the rambling writing really represents that. But even though I didn't necessarily like this book, I definitely still like Jack Kerouac, like his writing. He does a lot of great writing, and this book just happened to be one that didn't really work out. It just kind of didn't do it for me. And I think after the success of On the Road, publishers really wanted to publish everything they could about Jack Kerouac. They wanted to take every single piece of writing he had and just get it out there because they knew it would sell. I think that's what just this book represents. And I think when I read Jack Kerouac, I really like his descriptions of America. He really does a good job describing the state of America during the 1950s. I think the Subterraneans just really doesn't do that. It's not really focused on describing America the way his other books have been, at least the ones that I've read. But anyway, it's not a book that I would recommend someone to read, but if you're really studying Jack Kerouac, it's definitely, I think, necessary to read just to understand what this book is about, just to kind of see how he had so many different types of writing he was doing. Reading one Jack Kerouac book, I don't think really represents his writing. You have to read multiple books because his writing, every book is different, it seems like. He's always changing his writing style. It's hard to get a sense of who he is from one book. And I think also this constantly shifting writing style is just reflective of his life. He was just constantly moving and traveling and changing, and it really comes out in his writings in different books and the way he writes within the same book sometimes. But anyway, those are my thoughts on Subterraneans, and be sure to subscribe for more book reviews.